Two people live on the same street, earn almost the same paycheck, and pay the same rent. 30 years from now, one of them retires with nearly $1 million. The other retires with almost nothing. Neither one got a raise that explains the gap. Neither one won the lottery. The person who ended up wealthy followed a quiet set of habits that came out of Japan more than 100 years ago. And by the end of this, you will understand every single one of them. This is not really a story about Japan. It is a story about what money actually responds to, which turns out to have very little to do with the size of your paycheck and almost everything to do with how you treat that paycheck once it lands in your hands. Japan simply happened to write the instructions down first and write them clearly in a form ordinary households could actually follow. Consider what most of us were taught to believe. We were told that wealth is an income problem. The story goes that once your salary crosses some magic line, the saving and the security will sort themselves out on their own. So people chase the raise, the promotion, the better paying job in another city. And a strange thing happens when they finally get it. The bigger paycheck arrives, the bigger life arrives right behind it, and the distance between what comes in and what stays behind does not move at all. Look at where that has left us. In the United States right now, the national saving rate sits at roughly 3% of after-tax income. The average American is setting aside about $3 out of every 100 they bring home. While that is happening, inflation running close to 4% is quietly eating the value of whatever they did manage to hold on to. More than a third of people in this country say they expect to lean on a credit card or a buy now, pay later loan just to cover this month's ordinary bills, and that group includes plenty of households earning six figures. According to recent data from Empower, the typical emergency cushion is around $600. That is the entire buffer standing between a lot of families and the next surprise car repair. So how does the neighbor earning less end up with more? The answer is a system, and the system has a clear shape. Before we get into it, sit with the income myth for one more moment, because it is the thing quietly sabotaging so many people. The belief that a bigger salary is the answer feels obviously true, and it is wrong in a very specific way. A raise increases the fuel coming in, but it does absolutely nothing to fix a leaky tank. If your habits let money run straight back out the door, a larger paycheck just means a larger amount running out the door at greater speed, while the feeling of being behind never actually goes away. This is why so many high earners live paycheck to paycheck and lie awake worrying about money, while a calm warehouse worker on half their salary quietly builds a fortune. The salary was never the variable that mattered. The behavior around it was. Once you truly absorb that, the entire game changes, because the wealthy outcome stops being something you have to earn your way into and becomes something you can simply choose your way into. There is even a particular flavor of wealth this system produces. It does not show up as a new truck in the driveway or a watch you are meant to notice across a room. It is quiet, and the quiet is not an accident. The quiet is the whole point. Let me walk you through it one principle at a time, with the real numbers attached to each, because the numbers are where this stops being a pleasant idea and becomes an actual plan you could start this week. Number 1. Write it down. In 1904, a woman named Hani Motoko, widely remembered as Japan's first female journalist, published something deceptively simple in a women's magazine. She called it Kakeibo, which translates roughly to household financial ledger. The idea was that at the start of each month, you write down what you earn and what you owe. Every expense then gets sorted into a small handful of categories, usually something like needs, wants, culture, and the unexpected. At the end of the month, you sit down with a pen and answer a few honest questions. You look at how much money you actually had coming in, what you truly wanted to set aside, where it really went instead, and what one thing you will change going forward. 4 questions, ask slowly by hand. The slowness is not a flaw in the design. It turns out to be the medicine. Those 4 categories matter more than they look. Needs are the things you cannot avoid, like rent and food and the lights staying on. Wants are the choices, the dinners out, and the small comforts. Culture is the spending that genuinely enriches you. The books and the classes and the experiences you would never want to give up. And the unexpected is the bucket for the repairs and the emergencies that arrive whether you planned for them or not. Sorting every dollar into one of those 4 forces a quiet question with each purchase. Which one is this? Really, most spending that wrecks a budget is wants in disguise, dressed up as needs. That was the entire method. No app, no automation, no streak to keep alive, just a notebook and a willingness to look. And more than 120 years later, Kakeibo notebooks are still steady sellers in Japanese stationery shops because the thing genuinely works. People who stick with it for a few months tend to report real, measurable jumps in how much they save. Think about that for a second. The most sophisticated, most automated financial tools in human history are sitting in your pocket right now, and a paper ledger from the year 1904 still outperforms them for the people who commit to it. That is not because paper is magic. It works because of attention. When you write a purchase down by hand, you are forced to look at it and name it. You cannot tap a button and watch the number vanish into a feed you will never scroll back through. Researchers who study spending have found that the simple friction of recording a cost by hand makes people spend less almost immediately, without anyone telling them to cut a single thing. Take Yuki, a high school teacher earning $46,000 a year, who was completely convinced she had no margin to save anything at all. For exactly 1 month, she wrote down every dollar that left her hands. The rent was not the problem, and neither were the groceries. The real drain was a long, quiet trail of small purchases she had honestly never noticed. The kind of spending that never feels like a decision because each piece of it is so tiny on its own. By the end of that single month, she had identified just over $300 of spending she could not even reconstruct the reason for. She did not earn 1 extra cent. She simply saw, for the first time, where the money had been slipping out the door. And seeing it was the whole battle, because you cannot fix a leak you have never actually looked at. Number 2, the 80% rule. There is an old Japanese eating principle called hara hachi bu, practiced for generations in Okinawa, one of the longest living regions on the planet. It means you stop eating when you are about 80% full rather than stuffing yourself to the point of discomfort. On its surface, it has nothing to do with money, but borrow the shape of it, and it becomes one of the most reliable wealth rules ever written down. Live on 80% of what you earn. Send the other 20% somewhere it can grow, and do it before your lifestyle ever gets the chance to swallow it. The crucial detail is the order. Spending first and saving whatever happens to survive until the end of the month is the default almost everyone falls into, and the brutal truth of that approach is that nothing is ever actually left to save. So you flip it. The saving comes out the instant the paycheck arrives, automatically, and you build your whole life around the 80% that remains. The money you never see is money you never miss. This is also why automation beats willpower every single time. Willpower is a finite thing that drains across a long day, which is why the strongest budgeting intentions tend to collapse around the third tempting moment of a tired Friday. An automatic transfer feels nothing, gets tired of nothing, and never once negotiates with you. It moves the 20% before your conscious mind even registers that the paycheck landed. Living on the 80% that is left is not about a life of grim restriction. For most people, it simply means the same life, run with a little more intention, With one quiet adjustment, they stop noticing within a month or two. Here is where the math starts to get loud. Brendan works as a warehouse shift lead and earns $52,000 a year. 20% of that is $10,400 set aside annually. He never lays eyes on it because it leaves his account automatically on the same day his paycheck lands, long before he could spend it. He puts it into a basic, low-cost index fund that simply tracks the broad American stock market. Over the long run, that market has returned somewhere around 10% a year on average, and closer to 7% a year once you account for inflation. That single habit then does something that sounds invented until you actually run the numbers. At a conservative 7%, Brendan's $10,400 a year grows to just under $1 million across 30 years. Out of his own pocket, he will have contributed $312,000 over those decades. Everything above that, well over $600,000 of it, is growth he never worked a single extra hour to earn. And if the market delivers something nearer to its long-run average of 10%, that exact same habit carries him north of $1.7 million on a $52,000 salary, with no raise, no second job, and no clever trick, only a refusal to spend the last 20 cents of every dollar he makes. That is the engine the entire system is built around. Everything else you are about to hear exists to protect that engine and feed it more fuel. Number 3, waste nothing. The Japanese have a word, motenai, that English does not really have a clean equivalent for. It is a sense of regret at waste, a small ache at letting something useful go unused. People say it about a half-eaten meal scraped into the trash, or a good tool left out to rust. Pointed at your money, it lands on something that almost all budgeting advice manages to miss entirely. The thing that quietly drains a person is rarely the big, agonized overpurchase. It is the leak. A leak is small, constant, and nearly invisible by design. It might be the subscription you forgot you signed up for, or the convenience fee you have simply stopped registering, or the groceries you bought with good intentions and let spoil in the back of the fridge. $200 a month of this kind of quiet leakage feels like nothing in the moment. It feels like the ordinary background cost of being a busy human being. The reason these leaks survive for years is that the human brain treats a small recurring charge as if it has disappeared. A one-time purchase of $100 stings, and you remember it. A recurring charge of $10 a month barely registers after the first one, even though across a few years it quietly costs more than the painful one-time purchase ever did. The companies charging you understand this perfectly, which is exactly why so much of modern spending has been quietly converted into small automatic subscriptions you forget you are even paying. The discomfort of motenai is the antidote because it trains you to feel the waste before it compounds. A single afternoon spent hunting down and canceling the forgotten charges is one of the highest paying hours of work a person can do, and almost nobody ever sits down to do it. But run it forward in time. $200 a month is $2,400 a year. Invested at that same conservative 7% over 30 years, the leak you never even noticed would have quietly become more than $220,000. That is the kind of number that makes accountants wince. A small fortune in future wealth, drained away one forgettable charge at a time, never once felt as a real loss. Colette, a dental hygienist, found her own leak almost by accident. The first time in years she actually read her bank statement line by line. There were 3 streaming services she had stopped watching months ago. A gym membership she had used twice since spring. A storage unit holding furniture she was never realistically going to use again. None of it was a catastrophe on its own. Added together, it came to about $6 a day, which over 30 years at 7% works out to north of $200,000 she had been unknowingly giving away. When she finally cut it, she did not feel deprived in the slightest. She felt like she had handed herself a raise that no employer could ever claw back. Number 4, know what enough is. This is the principle that quietly governs all the others, and it has the deepest roots of any of them. At a temple in Kyoto called Ryoan-ji, there is a small stone water basin carved with 4 characters arranged around a central square opening. Read together, they form a phrase usually translated as, "I learn only to be content." The teaching, which runs through Zen and far older Buddhist thought, is that contentment is not the thing you finally feel after you get enough. Contentment is the decision to define what enough actually is, on purpose, before the endless wanting takes the wheel. In money terms, this is the only real antidote to the single most expensive habit in modern life, the slow disease known as lifestyle creep. You get the raise, and a nicer apartment quietly follows it. The car gets upgraded because the old one suddenly feels embarrassing. The vacations stretch longer, and the restaurants get pricier. Your spending rises to meet your income the way water rises to fill a glass, and your saving rate, which is the only number that ever truly builds wealth, never climbs an inch no matter how much more you earn. Watch exactly what that costs a person. Paloma and a coworker both pull down the same $52,000 salary at the same company. Paloma decided early what enough looked like for her, and she locked her saving rate at 20% no matter what raises came later. Her coworker saves at the national average of about 3% and spends the rest on a life that gets a little nicer every year. Both of them work hard. Both genuinely believe they are being responsible adults with their money. The trap is so subtle because every individual step inside it feels completely reasonable. The coworker gets a small raise and upgrades the apartment, which seems fair after years of working hard. A bonus arrives and the car gets traded up because the old one had started to feel a little embarrassing in the office parking lot. Each decision, taken on its own, looks sensible and even earned. Stacked together over years, they form a cage. The coworker is now locked into a higher cost of living that demands the full paycheck just to maintain, which means walking away from that demanding job is no longer an option, and the saving rate stays frozen near the floor. Paloma simply let her raises flow into the gap between her income and her lifestyle, widening it on purpose year after year. 30 years down the line, at that same steady 7% return, Paloma is sitting on just under $1 million. Her coworker, on the identical paycheck the entire time, has landed around $147,000. The space between them is more than $800,000, which means Paloma walks away with nearly 7 times the wealth of someone who earned every bit as much as she did year for year. The only real difference was a number each of them chose, plus the quiet discipline to never let that number drift upward just because the paycheck did. Defining your enough does not make you poorer. It is the very thing that makes all the wealth on the other side of it possible. Number 5, be quietly wealthy, not visibly wealthy. Japanese aesthetics has an idea called shibumi, a kind of beauty that is understated, restrained, and confident enough that it feels no need to be seen. It is the finely made suit with no logo on it anywhere. It is the dish that looks utterly simple on the plate and took a master years to learn to make. Carried into your financial life, shibumi explains the difference between looking rich and being rich, and those two states are very often direct opposites of each other. The person chasing visible wealth carries all the symbols. There is the financed luxury car that costs a fortune to insure, the watch meant to be recognized, the larger house with rooms nobody ever walks into. Every one of those symbols costs real money to acquire, and then keeps right on costing money to maintain and insure and replace. The display itself becomes a treadmill that never slows down, always demanding the next payment just to keep the image from slipping. The quietly wealthy person stepped off that treadmill entirely. Their sense of security does not live on their wrist or in their driveway where everyone can see it. It lives in accounts that almost no one will ever lay eyes on. They sleep soundly at night, they can walk away from a job that turns toxic without panic, and they make their decisions from a place of options instead of fear. Garrett, a 51-year-old auto mechanic, drives a 15-year-old truck that he services himself, and he has driven something like it for as long as his neighbors have known him. Those same neighbors would be genuinely stunned to learn he is closing in on $750,000 in invested savings. He looks completely ordinary, and he does it on purpose. The ordinary appearance is not some painful sacrifice he is grimly enduring. It is the actual cause of the wealth rather than a side effect of it. If you are finding real value in this, take a moment to subscribe, because this channel breaks down exactly this kind of calm, math-backed strategy every single week, and the principles still ahead are the ones that quietly do the heaviest lifting of all. So we have walked through awareness, the 80% rule, sealing the leaks, defining your enough, and staying invisible. Each of those decides how much of your money survives long enough to be put to work in the first place. What comes next decides how hard that surviving money actually labors once it is in place, and this is the territory where small, almost boring structural choices open up gaps that look downright unfair when you finally see them side by side. Number 6, never let your money sleep at a loss. There is a quiet scandal hiding in plain sight inside the ordinary banking system. The national average interest rate on a savings account in the United States right now, according to the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, is 0.38%. At the biggest traditional banks, the household name ones with a branch on every other corner, the flagship savings rate frequently rounds down to about 0.01%. That is 1 penny of interest per year for every $100 you have handed them to hold. Now set that against a high-yield savings account, the kind offered by online banks, which in the middle of 2026 are paying somewhere in the neighborhood of 4%. Same federal insurance protecting your deposit up to $250,000. Same safety, same dollar you could pull out tomorrow morning if you needed it. The only thing that changed is which institution happens to be holding the money. Run $10,000 through each of them and watch what happens. At the big banks, 0.01%. That money earns you a single dollar over a whole year. At the national average of 0.38%, it earns you $38. Move it to a 4% account, and the very same $10,000 earns $400. Identical amount, identical year, identical risk. The person at the high-yield account walks away with $362 more than the person at the average bank, purely for having moved the money into a different building. Stretch that out over 10 years, and the high-yield account throws off close to $4,800 in interest, while the big bank account produces around $10 total across the entire decade. Mariko kept her emergency fund parked at a major national bank for years, simply because it was where her checking account already lived, and switching felt like a hassle she would get to eventually. The afternoon she finally opened a high-yield account online and transferred the balance over took her about 20 minutes. Those 20 minutes will now pay her more every single year than she earns from a full day of work at her job. The high-yield account is not the only option in this family either. A certificate of deposit will often pay a similar rate in exchange for locking the money away for a set stretch of months. A money market fund at a major brokerage does something comparable for cash you want to keep flexible. The exact wrapper matters far less than the principle underneath all of them. Cash that is not actively earning a competitive rate is cash that is quietly losing a race you did not know you had entered. Money that sits still at a near zero rate is not actually safe, no matter how secure it feels sitting in a familiar bank. It is shrinking in real terms, because inflation running close to 4% is outrunning nearly every traditional account in the country. Standing still in this environment means sliding backward. Number 7, take the free money, then start the engine. If your employer offers a 401k retirement plan with a match, and you are not contributing enough to capture all of that match, you are turning down a guaranteed return that no investment anywhere on earth can promise you. A very common match is 50 cents on the dollar, up to 6% of your pay. On Brendan's $52,000 salary, contributing 6% means he puts in $3,120 across the year, and his employer drops another $1,560 right on top of it, free simply for taking part. That combined $4,680 a year, invested at 7% over 30 years, turns into more than $440,000. And keep in mind that a full third of the money feeding that result was never his to begin with. It was the employer's contribution, the part he would have just left sitting on the table by not signing up. The match alone, only the free portion, compounds into roughly $147,000 over those same 3 decades. People walk past that every year as though it were nothing at all, as though free money with a guaranteed match were somehow beneath their attention. For 2026, the rules give you serious room to work inside. You can put up to $24,500 into a 401k. On top of that, you can add up to $7,500 a year into an individual retirement account, and if you choose the Roth version of that account, the growth comes out completely tax-free when you retire. That Roth choice is worth understanding in plain terms, because it quietly decides how much of your money the future government gets to keep. A traditional account lets you skip the tax now and pay it later, when you pull the money out in retirement. A Roth account is the reverse. You pay the tax on the seed today, and in exchange, every dollar of growth it produces over the decades is yours, fully tax-free when you finally withdraw it. For a young person with many years of compounding ahead, that trade is often enormously in their favor, because the seed is small and the harvest is vast, and the harvest is the part that escapes the tax entirely. Paying tax on a $7,500 seed today to shield a $700,000 harvest later is a trade most people would take in a heartbeat if they understood it. Consider what just that one account does. Dwayne, a 30-year-old electrician, decided to max out only his individual retirement account, $7,500 a year and nothing more. At 7% over 30 years, that single account alone carries him to more than $700,000. These are not exotic instruments reserved for the already rich. They are sitting right in front of nearly every working person in the country, quietly waiting to be switched on. Number 8, build for the long horizon. Japan is home to more century-old businesses than any other nation on the planet, and a handful of them have operated continuously for well over 1,000 years. There is a word for these enduring family enterprises, shinice, and the ones that last all seem to share a single mindset. They are not trying to win this particular quarter. They are trying to still be standing 100 years from now, and that one shift in time horizon quietly changes every decision they make along the way. Your wealth wants to be treated in exactly that spirit. The most criminally underused force in all of personal finance is not some clever stock pick or a perfectly timed trade. It is time itself, and time only rewards the people who hand it over early. The decision to start young feels small and easy to delay when you are in your 20s. It is the precise opposite of small. Watch what a head start actually does. Take that same $10,400 a year, growing at 7%. Run it for 30 years, and you arrive at just under $1 million, which is already remarkable on its own. Now run the identical contribution for 40 years instead, simply by beginning 10 years earlier, and the result does not climb by a third. It climbs past $2 million. Those 10 extra years at the very start roughly double the entire final outcome, because the money you invest in your 20s has the most time to compound on top of itself. And compounding does the overwhelming majority of its work in the final stretch, when the snowball is already enormous. Hideo understood this in his late 20s and set the whole thing to run automatically, then more or less forgot about it for 2 solid decades while he lived his quiet, unremarkable life. The contributions left every payday without him having to make a fresh decision each time. The growth stacked itself on top of previous growth while his attention was elsewhere entirely. He never once tried to time the market, never panicked and sold during the downturns, never bragged to anyone about any of it. He simply gave the system enough time and then got out of its way, which is the entire shine ice mindset translated into a single ordinary financial life. That refusal to panic is quietly worth a fortune all on its own. Over any 30-year stretch, the market will crash hard several times, and each crash will feel, in the moment, like the one that finally breaks everything. The people who sell in a panic at the bottom lock in their losses and miss the recovery that always, eventually, follows. The people who do nothing, who keep their automatic contributions running straight through the fear, end up buying shares at a discount while everyone else is fleeing. Automation protects you from your own worst instinct, which is the instinct to act precisely when acting hurts you most. Hideo was not braver than other investors. He had simply removed his own hands from the wheel, so there was no button left for his fear to press. So that is the art, laid out end to end. It begins with writing things down so you can finally see them, then living on 80% and automating the other 20 before you can touch it. From there, it means sealing the small leaks, deciding in advance what enough looks like, and refusing to let your security turn into a display for other people. After that, it is about never letting your money sleep at a near zero rate, capturing every dollar of free employer money on offer, and finally handing the whole arrangement the one ingredient it cannot do without, which is time. Not a single piece of that requires a high income. Every piece of it requires only that you stop treating money as something that merely happens to you and start treating it as something you quietly direct. Which brings us right back to the 2 neighbors from the beginning. The ones on the same street with the same paycheck, walking toward 2 completely different endings. The wealthy one was never any wealthier in salary than the other. They were only ever wealthier in habits, repeated quietly for a very long time. But there is a gap behind the gap, and it is worth naming before you go. Everything we just covered quietly assumes you already have a stable floor underneath you, a foundation that does not lurch when the stock market does. Money you know will still be there no matter what any single year throws at the economy. That floor is the exact thing most people skip right over in their hurry to get to the exciting part. And skipping it is what turns an ordinary market downturn into a full-blown panic that wrecks an otherwise flawless plan. The most reliable place to begin building that floor, and the calmest possible first step into thinking about retirement years before you feel ready to, is something far older and steadier than any stock. It is bonds. The boring, dependable, government-backed instruments that pay you to lend your money out, that hold their ground when everything else lurches sideways, and that quietly anchored serious wealth for generations before index funds ever existed. A United States savings bond tied to inflation is paying a composite rate of 4.26% at the moment, and a 10-year Treasury sits near 4.4%, with the full backing of the federal government standing behind every dollar of it. That is the floor the entire pyramid balances on top of. If you want to understand where a genuinely solid financial life actually begins, before the stocks, before the risk, before any of the rest of it, the next thing worth your time is the full breakdown of bonds waiting on this channel. It is the real starting line, and it is the one piece almost nobody bothers to learn first. The neighbor who retired with nearly $1 million did not start with the thrilling part. They started with the floor, laid one quiet brick at a time, and then they simply gave it years to do what it always does.